I neglected my daughter for my new husband, went on a family trip without her, and told her to move on. But my ungrateful daughter embarrassed me in front of my family, replaced me with her friend's mom, and has now abandoned me. Throwaway because some of my relatives are online. I'm 49F, and I've been seeing Dave 43M for a little over 2 years. I have a daughter, Chloe, who turned 16 this summer. Dave has 2 kids, a 9-year-old daughter and a 7-year-old son. For context, Chloe's dad and I divorced when she was very young. We don't have a hostile relationship, but we're not friends either. It's more like we operate around each other when necessary. Chloe lives with me most of the time, and she goes to her dad's place when I'm away or occasionally on weekends. For a long time, it was just me and Chloe. Not in a dramatic we're best friends way, but we had our rhythm. Quiet dinners, watching shows together, arguing about small things like dishes or curfew, normal stuff. I didn't date seriously for years after the divorce. There were a couple of short-lived things, but nothing that ever became part of our daily life. So when Dave came into the picture, it was the first time Chloe had to actually adjust to me having someone consistent. In the beginning, she didn't react much. The first time she met him, she was polite but distant. I remember she barely looked at him when he said hello, just gave a quick hi and went back to her phone. At the time, I told myself that was normal teenage behavior. There was this one moment early on that stuck with me though. Dave had brought over takeout for all of us, trying to do something casual. He asked Chloe what she liked to eat beforehand and made sure to include it. When we sat down, he tried to make conversation, asking her about school. She answered, but in that clipped way. One-word responses, no eye contact. At one point, he joked about how math was never his strong subject, trying to relate, and Chloe just said, "It shows," and kept eating. It wasn't outright disrespectful, but it wasn't warm either. After he left that night, I told her she didn't have to be overly friendly, but she didn't need to be cold either. She said, "I wasn't cold, I just don't care." That was the first time I felt that underlying resistance. Over time, I stopped pushing interactions between them. If he came over, she'd stay in her room or sit with us quietly. If we went out somewhere together, she'd come along sometimes, but she always felt separate from it. Meanwhile, Dave's relationship with his kids is very different. When he has them, he's fully engaged. He plans things, takes them out, and includes them in whatever he's doing. I've gone with them a few times, and it's very active. Games, outings, constant interaction. I noticed Chloe watching that dynamic once when we all went to a park together. Dave was helping his son climb something, his daughter was laughing about something trivial, and Chloe was just sitting on a bench scrolling. At one point, Dave asked if she wanted to join them for a game, and she said, "I'm good." But I remember the look on her face, not annoyed, not bored. Something else. I couldn't quite place it at the time. Things started shifting more noticeably about a year in. That's when the comments began. The first one I really remember was small. I told her I was going to a concert with Dave. She said, "You never take me to stuff like that." I reminded her that she doesn't even like that kind of music. She shrugged and said, "Still." It didn't turn into a fight, but it lingered. Then it became a pattern. If I got dressed up to go out, she'd say something like, "Wow, you're really trying tonight." If I mentioned dinner plans, it was another date. Sometimes it was more subtle, just a sigh or a look or silence that felt intentional. I started noticing that she'd get especially quiet right before I left the house, not asking questions, not engaging, just withdrawing. One night, as I was heading out, I told her there was food in the fridge and I'd be back around 10. She didn't respond. I asked if she heard me, and she said without looking up, "Yeah, I'm used to it." That one irritated me. I told her, "Used to what?" "Me going out occasionally." And she said, "You go out a lot." Which isn't true. Maybe once or twice a week at most. I pointed that out, and she said, "Feels like more." That phrase feels like it started coming up more often. Around the same time, she began making comparisons to Dave, specifically how he is with his kids. It came up one evening after he had taken them to some event. Chloe had been with her dad that day, and when she got home, she saw photos I had left open on my phone. She asked, "You went with them?" I said yes. She nodded slowly and said, "He does stuff with his kids all the time." I said, "Yeah, when he has them, he plans things." And she said, "You don't do that with me." That caught me off guard because it didn't line up with how I saw things. We spend time together constantly. Maybe not in big, planned-out activities every week, but we're together. We talk, we eat together, we exist in the same space daily. I told her that. She didn't argue, but she didn't agree either. She just said, "That's not the same." I remember feeling a mix of frustration and confusion, because what exactly was she expecting? Weekly events, constant outings. It didn't feel realistic. But I also didn't fully dismiss it. So I tried, for a while, to plan more things with her. I suggested going shopping together one weekend. She said she had homework. I offered to take her out to dinner somewhere she liked. She said she wasn't hungry. At one point, I even got tickets to something I thought she'd enjoy. She went, but she spent most of the time on her phone and seemed uninterested. Afterwards, she said, it was okay. That was it. It started to feel like no matter what I did, it wasn't going to land the way she wanted it to. And at the same time, the comments about Dave never really stopped. If anything, they became more pointed. When I told her about this upcoming Florida trip, I expected some level of reaction, but not what actually happened. At first, it was the usual tone. Of course you are. I ignored it. Then later that day, she said, must be nice to just leave whenever you want. That phrasing bothered me. I said, I'm not just leaving, you'll be with your dad. And she said, still. It escalated over the next few days. You always have money for trips with him. That one felt unfair. I told her that these trips are planned and budgeted for and that we do things together too. She immediately said, like what? I listed things, our summer beach trips, dinners and time together, and she cut me off with, that's like once a year. That's when I started getting more defensive. Because it felt like she was reducing everything I do for her into something insignificant just to make a point. I told her she was being ungrateful. She didn't react loudly, she just looked at me and said, okay. But it was an agreement. It was that kind of okay that means the conversation is over, not resolved. A couple of days later, I overheard her on the phone with a friend. I wasn't trying to listen, but I caught enough to understand the tone. She said, yeah, she's going to Florida with her boyfriend. No, I'm not going. I'll probably just be at my dad's. Yeah, it's whatever. The it's whatever didn't sound like whatever. It sounded like something she didn't want to explain. Then came yesterday. We were at a family gathering. My brother, his kids, and my dad. Nothing formal, just everyone spending time together. Things were fine at first. Normal conversation, nothing tense. Then Chloe, completely out of nowhere, says, loud enough for everyone to hear, guess what? Mom is going to Florida with Dave just so she can have fun without me. Everything went quiet for a second. I felt that immediate heat of embarrassment. Not because I think I'm doing something wrong, but because of how it sounded coming from her. Like I was deliberately excluding her. My brother gave me this look like he wasn't sure how to respond. My dad just stayed quiet, but I could tell he heard every word. I tried to brush it off quickly, change the subject, and keep things moving. But Chloe didn't look embarrassed. She looked satisfied, like she'd said something she'd been waiting to say. Later, while talking to her cousin, she did it again. Mom's leaving me next weekend so she can go to Florida. It stopped feeling like passive comments and started feeling intentional. On the drive home, I told her that what she said wasn't appropriate. She immediately said, I was just telling the truth. And that's where the conversation started to turn into something bigger, I told her. No, you weren't. You were trying to make it sound like I'm abandoning you. She let out this short laugh, not amused, more like disbelief. You are, though. That irritated me more than anything she'd said in front of my family. I said, you're staying with your father, you're not being left alone. She turned towards the window, arms crossed. That's not the point. I asked her, then what is the point? Because right now, it just sounds like you're trying to make me look bad. She didn't answer right away, just sat there, jaw tight, staring out. I thought she was going to shut down again like she usually does when things get too direct. But then she said, you only do fun things with him. Same line, but this time, it didn't come out sarcastic. It came out flat. I said, that's not true. We do things together all the time. She shook her head. Not like that. There it was again. That vague, not like that. Like there's some invisible category of time that only counts if it meets her definition. I asked her what she actually meant. Not in a frustrated tone, just directly. She hesitated, then said, you don't plan anything with me. You just exist with me. That one landed harder. I told her, that's because I'm with you every day. We don't need to plan everything. She immediately responded, but you do for him. I didn't have a quick answer for that, because she wasn't wrong. When I'm with Dave, we make plans. We go out, we do things, we create those event moments. With Chloe, it's more built in, always there. But hearing it framed like that made it sound like I was giving him something I wasn't giving her. I said, that's different. He's my partner. Of course we plan things together. She said, exactly. That exactly didn't feel like agreement. It felt like confirmation of something she'd already decided. The rest of the drive was quiet. When we got home, she went straight to her room. I didn't go after her right away. I needed a minute to cool off because I could feel myself getting defensive, and that wasn't going to help. Later that night, I knocked on her door. She said, what? I went in and sat on the edge of her bed. She didn't look at me, just kept scrolling on her phone. I told her, I want to understand what you're actually upset about, not the comments, the real issue. She didn't respond. I waited a few seconds, then said, is it about Dave specifically, or is it about me? That got her attention. She looked at me for a second, then said, it's about you. That surprised me, even though it shouldn't have. I asked, okay, then what about me? She put her phone down this time, but she didn't look calm. More like she'd been holding something in and wasn't sure how to say it without it coming out wrong. She said, you changed. I said, in what way? She shrugged, but not dismissively. More like she didn't have the exact words. You just care more about your life now. That phrasing didn't sit right with me. I said, I've always cared about my life. She shook her head. Not like this. And then, after a pause, she added, before, it was just us. There it was. Not said dramatically, not said angrily, just stated like a fact she didn't like. I told her, it's still us, that hasn't changed. She looked at me like she didn't believe that at all. Yes, it has, she said. You have someone else now. Everything revolves around that. I started to respond, but she cut me off. You go out with him, you go on trips with him, you talk about him all the time. And when you're here, you're tired or busy or doing normal stuff. But with him, you're different. I asked her what she meant by that. She said, you're happier. That stopped me. Not because it was wrong, but because of how she said it. Like my being happier was something that took something away from her. I told her, I am happy. That's a good thing. She nodded, but her expression didn't change. She said, I know, just not with me. That's when the conversation shifted from frustrating to something heavier. Because now it wasn't about trips or comments. It was about how she sees her place in my life. I said, that's not true. I'm happy with you too. She didn't argue, but she didn't accept it either. She just said, it doesn't feel like it. I tried to explain that adult relationships are different, that it doesn't mean I value her any less, and that I can have both. I said, okay, then tell me what you want. Not what you don't like, what you actually want. She hesitated. Then she said, I want you to do things with me like you do with him. I asked, like what specifically? She got frustrated again. I don't know, just plan stuff, go places, not just the same beach every year. That caught my attention. Because the beach trip has always been our thing. I thought it meant something to her. I said, you've never said you didn't like the beach. She said, I do like it, but it's always the same. There was a brief silence after that. Then she added, quieter this time, it feels like you put more effort into your life with him than with me. That's the sentence that's been stuck in my head since last night, because I don't think I've ever looked at it that way. From my perspective, I've been consistent with her. Present, involved, stable. But from her perspective, consistency might look like lack of effort, and effort might look like those planned, intentional experiences I have with Dave. I told her I'd think about what she said. She nodded, picked her phone back up, and that was the end of it. No resolution. Just everything laid out in a way that's hard to ignore. This morning, things were normal on the surface. She got ready for school. We exchanged a few basic words, nothing tense, but nothing warm either. Before she left, she said, have fun in Florida. Not sarcastic, not kind either, just neutral. And that almost felt worse than the comments, because now I don't know where I stand. Part of me still feels like she crossed a line with how she handled this, especially bringing it up in front of family the way she did. That didn't feel like someone trying to communicate. That felt like someone trying to make a point at my expense. But another part of me is starting to question whether I missed something earlier. If those comments weren't just attitude, but attempts, bad ones, to express something she didn't know how to say directly, then. I also don't know what the right response is now. If I suddenly start planning more things with her, does that actually help? Or does it just reinforce that I've been doing something wrong this whole time? If I don't change anything, am I ignoring something that actually matters to her? And where do I draw the line with the public comments? Because I don't want to shut her down, but I also don't want to keep being put in that position in front of other people. I haven't canceled the Florida trip. I'm still going. But I don't feel as settled about it as I did before all this came up. I don't think I'm wrong for having a relationship or taking time for myself. At the same time, I can't ignore what she said either. So now I'm stuck trying to figure out if I've actually been unfair without realizing it, or if she's expecting something that isn't realistic. Am I the one in the wrong here? People's opinions. One said, you're not wrong for dating, traveling, or having a life outside your kid. That part is normal. The problem is, you kept answering her like she was debating facts when she was telling you how it feels to be your leftover time. We eat together, we run errands, we watch TV, is exactly the kind of thing a parent says when they don't realize they've stopped being intentional. She handled it badly. The family comments were manipulative and designed to embarrass you. That was out of line. But she's 15, not 35. Teenagers don't usually walk in and calmly say, "Mother, I'm struggling with displacement." They act sharp and mean first. Dave isn't doing anything wrong either, but Chloe is clearly seeing him get the version of you that plans, anticipates, and seems excited. She gets structure and logistics. That hurts. So, no, you're not some evil mother. But you are a little too focused on defending yourself instead of hearing the actual complaint. She's not asking you to stop loving Dave. She's asking whether there's still a version of you that chooses her on purpose. Another said, "Selfish twat waffle energy, honestly. Not because you're dating or going on trips, but because you're hearing your daughter and still centering yourself. She's not being subtle anymore. She flat out told you she wants one-on-one time with you, and your response was basically, 'Cool, maybe you can third wheel with me and Kate if I like the hotel.' Like, what? You're already giving Dave the best version of you. Planned trips, excitement, and effort. Your daughter is getting errands, and we live together, so that counts. And when she finally spells it out, you still don't adjust, you just defend. And yeah, she handled it badly in public, but she's 15. You're the adult. She's not asking for the moon. She's asking for intentional time with her mom alone. If you keep brushing this off, don't act shocked when in a couple years she stops trying altogether. This is exactly how parents end up wondering why their kid goes low or no contact later. She's literally telling you what she needs. Listen. Another opinion. That last part about Kate. That's where you lost me. Your daughter opens up. Which, by the way, is rare as hell at her age. And instead of actually meeting her where she is, you immediately dilute it by adding another adult into the plan. That tells her everything she needs to know. She's not your priority, she's an addition. You keep arguing technicalities like, "We spend time together all the time," but she's not talking about proximity. She's talking about a chosen time. Planned, intentional. The same kind you clearly have no issue giving Dave. Also, stop acting like this is about Florida. It's not. She doesn't care about the trip itself. She cares that your fun life seems to exist somewhere she's not invited to, or worse, not considered. And yeah, her delivery sucks. But kids don't escalate like that out of nowhere. You missed a lot of quieter moments before this. Drop the defensiveness and actually show up for her, or this gap is only going to get wider. Continuation. I didn't expect to be writing an update this soon, but a lot has happened since my last post, and I can't ignore it anymore, even if part of me still wants to. I went on the Florida trip. I considered canceling it after everything that happened with Chloe, but I didn't. At the time, it felt like giving in to guilt instead of dealing with the actual issue. Dave had already booked everything and taken time off work, and I told myself that one trip wasn't going to define my relationship with my daughter. Before I left, things were quiet, not tense in an obvious way. Chloe wasn't picking fights, but she also wasn't engaging. Short answers, no eye contact, staying in her room more than usual. The morning I left, she didn't argue or make any remarks. She just said, "Tell Dad what time you're dropping me off," like it was a logistical exchange. On the way to her dad's, I tried to keep things normal, asked about school, her friends, and what she had planned for the weekend. She answered, but it felt like talking to someone who had already checked out of the conversation before it started. When we got to her dad's, she grabbed her bag, said bye, and got out of the car without looking back. That stuck with me more than I expected. Florida itself was good. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. The hotel was nice, the weather was perfect, and Dave was relaxed in a way I don't see as much when we're both dealing with everyday responsibilities. We went out to dinner, spent time by the water, and did exactly what we planned to do. But there were moments where it didn't sit right. The first night, Dave made a comment while we were getting ready to go out. He said, "You're different when you're like this, more relaxed." I asked what he meant, and he said, "You just seem lighter, less on edge." It wasn't meant as a criticism, but I immediately thought of what Chloe said in the car. "You're happier." I didn't say anything at the time, but it stayed in the back of my mind. I also posted a few pictures while I was there. Nothing excessive, just normal things. Dinner, the beach, one of us dressed up before going out. Chloe didn't interact with any of it. I texted her a couple of times during the trip, asked how things were going, if she needed anything, and normal check-ins. Her responses were polite but minimal. "Fine, good, yeah." At one point, I sent her a picture of the beach and said, "You'd like this place." She replied, "Looks nice." That was it. No sarcasm, no attitude, just nothing. By the third day, I stopped trying to start conversations. It felt like I was talking into a wall. When I got back, I expected at least some kind of reset. Not everything fixed, but at least a return to normal interaction. That didn't happen. Chloe came home from her dad's later that evening. She walked in, said hi, and went straight to her room. No questions about the trip, no comments. Nothing. It wasn't anger, it was absence. Over the next couple of days, I started noticing things that didn't line up. She wasn't telling me about her day anymore, not even small things. Normally, she'll mention something about school, even if it's just complaining about a class or a teacher. Now, nothing unless I asked directly. Even then, the answers were short. I also noticed she was on her phone more, but not in the usual distracted way, more like engaged somewhere else. I found out where that somewhere else was by accident. A couple of days after I got back, I mentioned something about her schedule for the week, and she said, "I already told Lisa." I asked, "Who's Lisa?" She said, "Emma's mum." I know who Emma is, one of her closer friends, but I didn't know Chloe had any kind of relationship with her mum beyond basic interaction. I asked what she meant, and Chloe said, "She helps me figure stuff out sometimes." That didn't sit right with me. I asked, "What kind of stuff?" She shrugged and said, "Just things." I pushed a little more, and she got defensive. "It's not a big deal," she said. "She just listens." I asked her why she felt like she needed to talk to someone else instead of me. She looked at me for a second and said, "Because you argue with everything I say." I started to respond, but she cut me off. "I don't want to explain everything twice," she said, then went back to her room. That was the first time I felt something shift into something I couldn't just brush off. It got worse later that week. I found out from my brother, not Chloe, that she had been talking about me at another family get-together I didn't attend. Apparently, she made another comment about me, always being busy with Dave and only doing things when it's convenient. My brother didn't say it in an accusatory way, but it was clear he was forming an opinion. He said, "She seems hurt, not angry, not dramatic, just hurt." I immediately felt defensive and explained my side, how often we spend time together, how she's exaggerating, and how this is being blown out of proportion. He listened, but I could tell he wasn't fully convinced. That bothered me more than I expected. It felt like the narrative Chloe started was spreading. When I brought it up with Chloe, asking why she was talking about me like that, she said, "You talked about me too." I asked what she meant, and she said, "Dad told me you said I was being ungrateful." I had said that, once, in frustration. But hearing it come back like that made it sound worse than it felt at the time. I told her that was taken out of context. She just said, "Okay," in that same flat tone she's been using. Then came something I didn't expect. I suggested we still do our usual summer beach trip, trying to reestablish something familiar. She said, "I don't want to go." I thought she was joking at first. I said, "Since when?" She said, "I just don't feel like it this year." I asked if something happened, if she didn't like it anymore. She said, "It's the same every time." I said, "You've never had a problem with that before." She looked at me and said, "Yeah, before." I asked her what that meant, and she said, "Before everything changed." I tried to keep the conversation calm, but I could feel myself getting frustrated again. I said, "Not everything has changed." She didn't raise her voice. She just said, "It has for me." That was it. No argument, no escalation, just a statement. I tried one more thing after that. I told her we could plan something different, just the two of us. Not Kate, not anyone else. She didn't seem convinced. She said, "Like what?" And I realized I didn't have an immediate answer that didn't sound like I was trying to fix something. Not because I don't know what she likes, but because suddenly everything felt like it had a purpose behind it. Like it wasn't just doing something together, it was proving something. I suggested a few ideas anyway. A short trip, maybe somewhere new. She said, "We'll see." No enthusiasm. That same night, something else came up. She asked me if she could sign up for a program at school, something she's apparently been interested in for a while. It wasn't cheap. I hesitated, not because I didn't want her to do it, but because of timing and budgeting. I told her I needed to look into it. She said, "You didn't need to think about Florida." That hit directly. I told her that's not a fair comparison. She said, "It is to me." Then she walked away. At this point, I don't even know what would be worse if she were still making comments or if this is how things are now. Because at least before, she was reacting. Now it feels like she's adjusting. And I don't know if that's a phase or something more permanent. I still don't think I've done something fundamentally wrong. But I can't ignore that something is clearly off in a way that didn't exist before. I'm trying to figure out if this is something I fix by changing how I show up, or if I'm overcorrecting for something that's being exaggerated. Either way, I don't think this is just about a trip anymore, and I don't know if I'm handling it the right way. Opinions. One thinks, you're still doing the same thing that got you here, treating Chloe like a difficult witness to your life instead of your daughter. Every time she tells you something painful, you go straight into cross-examination mode. What do you mean? That's not fair. That's not true. Taken out of context. No sheet, she went to Emma's mum. Lisa probably lets her finish a sentence before defending herself. And the really ugly part. Chloe isn't even melting down anymore. She's organizing herself around the fact that you're not emotionally safe to come to. That is not teenage drama. That's a kid recalibrating. Also, the money comment matters. Not because she's entitled to every activity, but because kids notice where enthusiasm lives. You need to think about her program, but Florida was already booked. That's the kind of sheep that brands itself into a teenager's brain. Another person said, the detail that jumped out at me wasn't Florida, Lisa, or even the canceled beach trip. It was that you offered just us and then had absolutely no instinctive idea what that would even look like. That says a lot. Not that you don't love your daughter, but that you've gotten so used to motherhood as maintenance that intentional closeness with her now feels like a project. Meanwhile, Chloe is old enough to notice the difference between obligation and desire. That's the real wound here. She doesn't think you hate her. She thinks you fit her into your life while Dave gets the curated version. That's a mind duck for a teenage girl watching her mother rediscover herself in front of someone else. Also, you need to stop blaming the family comments without asking why she wanted an audience. My guess. Private conversations with you feel like dead ends. Public comments were her shitty workaround because she wanted other adults to see it. That doesn't make it okay, but it makes sense. You're not dealing with disrespect anymore. You're dealing with detachment. That's a hell of a lot harder to reverse. Continuation. I've read through the responses, even the ones that were harsh. I didn't agree with a lot of it at the time. I still don't agree with everything. But things have moved in a direction I didn't expect, and I can't really frame this as a misunderstanding anymore. A few days after my last update, I decided to act on it instead of sitting in it. I booked a trip for me and Chloe. Not a discussion, not a, what do you want to do? Just something concrete. I picked a place that wasn't our usual beach, somewhere I thought she'd like. I told myself that if what she wanted was intentional time, then I'd give her that in a clear, undeniable way. When I told her, she didn't react the way I expected. I said, I booked us a weekend away, just the two of us. She looked at me for a second and asked, when? I told her the dates. She said, you already booked it. I said, yes. There was a pause. Then she said, so you didn't even ask me. I told her I didn't think I needed to ask to plan something for us. She said, that's not the point. I asked her what the point was. She said, you're still deciding everything and then calling it for me. I told her I was trying to fix things. She said, you're trying to control it. That turned into an argument. Not loud, but sharp. At one point I said, you said you wanted me to plan things. She replied, I wanted you to care, not just schedule something. I told her she was twisting everything I did into something negative. She said, because it doesn't feel real. That was the moment I lost patience. I said, then what do you want? Because every time I try, it's wrong. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, I don't want to have to explain this anymore. I told her, if you can't explain it, then how am I supposed to fix it? And that's when she said something I didn't expect. If I have to explain it this much, it doesn't count. After that, she shut down the conversation completely. The trip never happened. I canceled it the next day. Around the same time, I decided to address something else that had been bothering me. I reached out to Emma's mom, Lisa. I kept it polite. I said I appreciated that she cared about Chloe, but I felt like some boundaries were being crossed, and I'd prefer if anything serious went through me. She didn't react defensively. If anything, that made it worse. She said, Chloe came to me. I didn't go looking for it. Then she added, she just needed someone to listen without being corrected. That wording felt pointed. I said, I listened to my daughter. She didn't argue. She just said, okay. That okay felt exactly like Chloe's. I didn't think much of it until Chloe found out. I don't know how she found out, but she did. She came to me that evening and said, did you talk to Lisa? I said yes. Her face changed immediately. Not angry, just closed. Why would you do that? She asked. I told her it was a boundary issue. She said, no, it's not. It's you trying to control who I talk to. I told her that as her parent, I have a right to know who's involved in her life like that. She said, then you should have been the one I went to. That ended the conversation. Not because we resolved it, but because she walked away and didn't come back to it. After that, things shifted in a way that's hard to describe unless you've seen it happen. She stopped trying. Not in a dramatic way, not rebellion, not acting out. She just removed herself. She started staying at her dad's more. At first it was small things, asking to stay an extra night, then a weekend, then saying it made more sense with her schedule. I pushed back on that. I told her we had an arrangement and she couldn't just change it whenever she felt like it. She said, why not? I said, because this is your home. She looked at me and said, it doesn't feel like it. That should have stopped me, but it didn't. I told her she was being influenced and that this wasn't coming from nowhere. She said, it is, you just don't like it. At one point during an argument, I said something I regret. I said, at least Dave's kids actually want to spend time with him. I didn't mean it the way it came out, but it landed exactly how it sounded. She didn't yell. She didn't react at all, actually. She just looked at me for a second, then said, okay, and went to her room. The next morning, she packed a bag and said she was going to her dad's. I told her she couldn't just leave like that. She said, I'll come back when I need to. That was 3 days ago. She hasn't come back. I've texted her. She responds, but it's the same tone as before. Short, neutral, distant. No emotion, just information. At the same time, things with Dave started to change. I told him what was going on, expecting support. At first, he listened, asked questions, tried to understand. Then he said something that caught me off guard. He said, you're still trying to win the argument instead of fixing the relationship. I told him that wasn't fair. He said, maybe not, but it's what it looks like. I didn't like that. I told him he didn't understand the full situation. He said, I understand enough. After that, he became distant, not immediately, but gradually. Less texting, shorter calls, canceling plans. I asked him directly if something was wrong. He said he needed to think about things. A couple of days later, we had a longer conversation. He said, I'm not comfortable moving forward like this. I asked what that meant. He said, I have kids too, and watching this, it makes me question things. I told him Chloe was being difficult and that this wasn't the full picture. He said, maybe, but if we move in together at some point, this becomes my life too, and I don't like what I'm seeing. That didn't sit well with me. I said, so you're judging my parenting based on a conflict? He said, I'm looking at how you handle it. Then he added, and I'm thinking about what happens if my kids feel like this one day. That felt like a line being drawn. After that, he pulled back even more. Then he stopped responding altogether for 2 days. No calls, no texts. When he finally responded, it was one message. I don't think this is something I want to continue. That was it. No discussion, no back and forth, just done. So now I'm here. My daughter is staying with her father. My relationship is over. And I'm left trying to figure out how everything escalated this far without me realizing how serious it had become. I still don't think I was wrong to have my own life. But I can't ignore where things ended up either. I don't know if this is something I can fix with Chloe at this point, or if I've already done enough damage that it's going to take more than just trying differently. And I don't know if I pushed Dave away by how I handled this, or if he was already looking for a reason to leave. Either way, I'm dealing with both at the same time, and I don't have a clear answer for how to fix either of them. Analysis. There's something uncomfortable about this story that goes beyond parent didn't listen or teen felt neglected. Those are surface-level takes. What's actually happening here is a clash between two completely different definitions of love, and neither side ever translated. The narrator operates on the principle that presence equals care. She's there every day. She provides stability, structure, and consistency. In her mind, that's the highest form of commitment. It's reliable, it's responsible, it's what a good parent looks like long-term. The problem is, Chloe isn't measuring love that way anymore. She's at an age where intent matters more than availability. Not, are you there? But did you choose me? And the narrator never adjusted to that shift. What makes this worse and more interesting is that the narrator did demonstrate that she understands intentionality, just not towards Chloe. She plans trips, creates experiences, and becomes lighter, more engaged, more alive, but that version of her is reserved for Dave. So Chloe isn't imagining a deficit. She's witnessing a contrast. That's the core fracture, not neglect, but selective effort. Now here's where it gets even more layered. Chloe didn't explode. She didn't spiral into chaos like a lot of teens would. She did something far more strategic. She tested, then withdrew. She made comments publicly, not because she wanted drama, but because private communication with the narrator had already failed. That wasn't immaturity. That was escalation after repeated dismissal. And when that didn't work, she reallocated. She found Lisa. She shifted to her dad's house. She stopped asking. That's not rebellion, that's adaptation. It's what people do when they realize pushing isn't effective anymore. Meanwhile, the narrator made a critical misstep that most people won't call out clearly. She treated emotional feedback like a problem to solve, not a reality to sit in. Every move she made, booking the trip, confronting Lisa, asking for clear explanations, was structured, logical, and efficient. And completely disconnected from what Chloe was actually asking for, which was something unstructured and irrational, to feel wanted without having to justify it. You can't optimize that. And the narrator kept trying to. Dave's reaction is also telling, but not for the obvious reason. He didn't leave because Chloe was difficult. He left because the narrator revealed how she handles emotional complexity under pressure. She defends, reframes, and manages optics. That's fine in adult disagreements. It's dangerous with kids. And he saw the long-term version of that playing out with his own. The most brutal part of this story isn't the breakup or Chloe leaving. It's the quiet shift in Chloe's language. When a teenager goes from emotional accusations to calm statements like, "not like before," that's not a phase. That's closure beginning. And the narrator never actually crossed a dramatic line. That's what makes this hit harder. There's no single moment you can point to and say, that's where she lost her. It's a series of reasonable decisions that, stacked together, created a relationship where one person felt consistently unchosen. That's the kind of damage that doesn't look explosive. It just looks final.